Today I'm going to be showing you about fold forming, which is the art of folding metal, hammering part of it, and opening it back up. So it's exactly how it sounds. Very much kin to origami. We have this book by Charles Luton Brain. He's kind of the father of fold forming. And this is a great book to have. There are so many different examples in it. You can make beautiful things. Some things that help you make more organic forms, like that look like leaves or petals. You can make things that look kind of like folded up fabric, you know, like with undulations in it. You can even like make the metal pucker and ruffle up, which is really cool too. So this book is definitely worth checking out, but I'm going to go through just a couple of the basic principles. The main thing about this is experimentation. As long as you're not hurting your tools, you can try a whole bunch of different things, and you could come up with stuff that's not even in the book yet. So it's all about having fun, trying new things, and experimenting with the metal and the hammers. So we need to use our knowledge of hammers to our advantage. So I have here this hammer. You know from riveting that this curved face here is going to stretch the metal in all directions. So we need to remember that. And then with the cross peen, we know that it's going to stretch metal perpendicular. And we can also use that knowledge to direct the metal the way we want it to go. So you're gonna need some hammers. It's a good idea to have a couple different ones, maybe also a rawhide. And then this is kind of a specialty tool. This is just a screwdriver, but we have filed it down to a really fine point to help us open those forms back up, because once you hammer the folds, they get really, really, really close together, and it can be difficult to open with a typical screwdriver. So we have this one that we filed down to a very thin point that will help us get in there. You'll also need your pliers maybe for different parts. So let's check it out. The first one I'm going to do is the one that I typically do most often. It ends up looking like a leaf or a petal. I believe it's called the Ruger fold in the book. So I have a annealed metal. This will work with any of the non-ferrous metals, but of course copper is the physically easiest to form, so that's what typically is used, but not always. And then you don't want to start with metal that's too thin. I usually use 20 or 18 gauge, because if you start too thin, as you hammer, you're going to make it thinner and thinner, and it ends up kind of sharp. So just know that. So I'm going to start by folding this in half, as close to the middle as I can get it. I'm going to do what I can with my hands, and then I'm going to hammer it down the rest of the way. Notice when I'm hammering, I'm not stiff arming it. I'm throwing the hammer down like this. I'm throwing it and catching it. I'm not doing this. By throwing and catching, you're letting the head of the hammer do the work and not your arm. Okay, so I'm hammering it down right at the fold. So now I just have a folded in half piece of metal. And I have these metal snips here to make it easier. And I'm just going to cut out like a leaf shape. You could certainly do this with your saw. And if this metal was any thicker, I would have to, because my hands would not be strong enough. But in this case, I'm good with the shears. So I'm cutting it into like a half leaf. So in theory, if I was to open it up right now, I would have kind of a full leaf shape. There we go. All right, now let's move you closer so you can see what's happening. So I've got my leaf shape, and now I'm going to use this cross peen that I know stretches the metal this way, and I'm going to hammer along the not folded edges. You can do this either way, but for this example, I'm going to hammer on the free edge. So always trying to make sure I'm not hitting the anvil, but just hitting the metal. And you can see that it is already starting to wrinkle up from the stretching. Look. So you can see the difference. All of that curve happens simply because the hammer is stretching the metal long ways. So I'm gonna keep going all the way across. So I try to look at it and keep it symmetrical as I can. It's not a huge deal. If it's not symmetrical, it just makes more sense to me that way. So you can see it is kind of curved, and I'm just gonna keep going until it kind of spirals in on itself. I may need to anneal and come back a couple of times. And you can tell I'm not being gentle and kind. This is a time to get out some aggression. So I've got it curved even more. And this is just a matter of preference. You go as far as you want. Whew, my arm's hurting. Okay, so I've got this going on. I think that's about as far as I want to go right now. So I'm going to anneal it and then open it up. I'm back with this straight out of the pickle, which you don't have to pickle it before you open it because the inside's still gonna be dirty. So now comes my very fine tool. You see how close together these are? That's why I need this kind of specialty tool. And if I'm worried about scratching it, I can put tape around it. So I put this in here and I'm just gently wiggling it back and forth. The part about this that you just need to know, it's not good or bad, is that when you open these things up, because they're copper and because they're ruffly, they do tend to look like vaginas. So it's just something to know, especially if you were going to do this in a classroom with, you know, kids. So I've started to kind of pry it open some. And now I'm going to use my pliers, which again, I can tape them if I'm worried about leaving marks. So I'm just gonna keep pulling this open. And the more you open it, the more it's going to spiral. So pull it open. Isn't it beautiful? And now I can take my round nose pliers and kind of encourage these ruffles to even out. And I can kind of control the spiraling this way too by directing the ruffles. So I just use these round nose pliers. This is what the Ruger fold ends up looking like. It's beautiful, kind of organic form. You can then put this in the pickle to get it the rest of the way clean. Now let's try something else. Okay, for this one, I am going to kind of make a little ruffle appear in the metal. It's super cool. So it starts the same way, annealed metal. I'm going to fold it, but I'm not gonna have it go all the way across, so I'm really just gonna focus on the middle. I've switched to this anvil, both to show you that you don't need a full anvil to do it, but also because my students are working in the other room. So I'm going to hammer down. And so however long I want my wiggly ruffle to be, that's what I'm gonna close up. Get it real nice and tight. See? And now I can use my knowledge of how these different hammer faces are going to stretch metal to my advantage. This one will stretch it all the way around, and then I can switch to the cross peen to really encourage this to thin out this away. So right now I'm just focusing on this very edge to really get a good surface to work with. And so if I anneal this and open it right now, it'll just have like a line, which is pretty cute, but I want the ruffle. So now, if I hammer this way, it's gonna stretch this part, which is good. But first, I wanna stretch it this way to have more metal that I can then play with. Really starting to get a good curve here. You can see where it's protruding out. We'll keep going. Okay, so you can see now I've really got a good protrusion of metal. So now I'm going to turn my cross peen and hammer this way to stretch it and encourage it to ruffle. But it's important to notice I'm trying to only hammer this part. I don't really want to stretch this part down here. If you feel like there's a high risk that you might hit the anvil with your hammer, you can always come over here to the edge and hammer on the edge. Okay, so now I've got a nice thin edge. It's a little longer up here. And I'm just gonna keep going back and forth. I'm gonna keep going back and forth until I have a nice amount of metal stretched out. The more metal and the more stretch, the more pronounced that ruffle will be. All right, I'm going to anneal this and open it. We're gonna see what it looks like. Okay, let's open this up. It has been annealed. So I'm just going to stick my special tool down in here. And on this one, this is the bottom, the underneath, so I'm not as worried about keeping it from scratches, although you certainly could be. Take my pliers. Just open it up. And one of the big issues with fold forming is that they can house a lot of water. You see how much water was still in that? And when you're using steel tools like an anvil, you want to make sure that you protect them from the water. So keep a towel close by to dry off any water that might still be present. Got it nice and dry now, so I can turn it over. And I'm just going to use this planishing hammer. So right now I've got kind of a curved hump there. And if I want this to go really flat, I can come back in with my cross peen. And then you can even come here on the side and do a little, this hammer's kind of curved, do a little work this way too. Kind of cool looking, huh? So I didn't get very much stretch here, so that's why it's not ruffling. If I had used a curved surface to hammer it on, it would ruffle more. But I can kind of get a little movement here with my pliers. But if I had hammered this on a curved surface, it would be a lot more of a wiggle. It's pretty neat, I think. It's a really neat form. Be an awesome belt buckle. Okay, one more. For this one, we're actually going to make use of the vise itself. and we're gonna do a couple of cross folds. And you'll see why that's called that in just a minute. So I'm going to once again fold it kind of into like a teardrop shape. And I'm going to pinch it in the vise. You can leave as much room there as you want depending on your desired effect. If you want a single line, you can do this and get it real close in there and just hammer right here. Or you can hammer this down completely flat and have 2 lines. But what I'm gonna do is called a cross. So I'm gonna hammer it down a little bit to get me some room to work with. Then I'm going to basically try to depress right here. I'm not being successful. Use my pliers here. So now, this isn't the prettiest one, but when we take it out, you can kind of see a little bit why that's called the cross form. And it could definitely be a lot better and tighten up on these corners a bit. This is all just a game. Like, you just gotta play around with it. There'll be some you like, some you really don't like. All of that is fine. Okay, so now I think I'm going to try and close this up and really get them on top of each other. Okay, so I'm gonna go with this. It's not uniform at all, but I'm curious. So I'm gonna kneel it and we'll come back and open it. Okay, I have this down to protect my steel tool. I'm going to try opening it again as it was not annealed enough last time. So this time it's kind of the same thing. You can use the hammer to really get it open. And I'm just leaving the towel there in case, because I knew that some of these were really closed up. And there is water still coming off, so that way I can wipe everything down. Look at that. Look how pretty that is. It looks like fabric. I really like that. That looks nice. That would look really pretty, like as a pendant or a belt buckle or something. And you can continue working with it to get it how you want it. I just kind of like it like this, so I thought I would leave it. I am kind of hitting the tops of the curves to work hard in them so that they don't reopen over time. Cool.